Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the latest and greatest episode of the Hell Money podcast. We're coming to you from a beautiful, undisclosed location in California, in Northern California. The sun is shining. The police helicopters are buzzing overhead. The chemtrails are all around us. No, just kidding. It's a lovely, bucolic day out here in the countryside.
It's Memorial Day.
That's right.
And that's for our fallen troops.
Our fallen troops, yeah. Big
so
up.
this one goes out to them. So we're doing some memorializing of our own.
Yeah.
In the episode.
We're sort of coming to you from the far future.
We are.
Memorializing human civilization.
We're building a little time capsule sort of project here.
Yeah, that's right.
We're thinking like, okay, 100, 1,000 years from now, whatever, someone's going to open this time capsule and I want them to understand me or something about the society in which I lived.
Yeah.
That's really the project that we're talking about today.
And time's pretty tricky. When you really think about it.
It's so true when you think about it.
Yeah, because we have time, and time is, in our current civilization tracked very precisely, right? We have all these timekeeping devices. We have all these ways that we are able to sort of average out the error from those timekeeping devices. So we have different timekeeping devices with different precisions, and they all contribute to our global, time marching forward according to their capabilities. But the odd thing about time is that if you're there tracking it, if you're there counting down the seconds, it's pretty easy to keep track of time. But if there's a large multi-millennia, gap in, somebody sitting there keeping time, possibly due to some sort of civilizationally disruptive event, then keeping time becomes very hard. You can restart the clock, you can restart keeping it, but how do you relate the new, ongoing measurement of time to this old span of time that had previously elapsed?
We think of a long time as being like a century or something, right?
Yeah.
100 years. Anything longer than a human lifespan is essentially unimaginable on a visceral experience of time kind of level, right? Most of our experience of time.
I don't know about that. I feel like I can imagine a century.
Yeah, you're I wish that I lived in colonial Europe or whatever.
Colonial Europe? You mean when the Normans came and conquered our Anglo-Saxon forebears?
Yeah, exactly. That's if I could go live in any time in history, it would be then.
Yeah, I want to Brexit, but for the Norman conquest. It's Frenchies, god damn it.
I just mean the idea of a million years.
A million years is a long time.
Is a long
I can't imagine
time.
a million years.
You can't, but a million years is not even that long. In terms of human or okay.
In terms of galactic time.
Yeah. Just how old are rocks, right? If you're if you're dating rocks, it's rocks. They're hundreds of millions or billions
Don't
of years old.
Don't tell people that I date rocks. That's a private matter.
Yeah. We need to keep that off air. Yeah, just
rocks
thinking about
old,
time.
We've established.
Deep time.
That's
what I'm trying to get at. Deep time is very difficult to wrap your mind around. 100 years feels like a long time to us. Okay, maybe 500 years is something that's okay. 500 years ago.
I don't mean to brag, but
IQ test. Can you imagine 500 years ago? No, it's just it's really, really tricky, I think, to try to think about things. I mean, when I said the time capsule comment, we haven't even really introduced what we're talking about here. We just kind of jumped right into time.
Yep.
But the time capsule project is an example of thinking about things from a deep time perspective. You're thinking about, okay, I have no context for myself and the life that I lived. So how can I, without context, explain that to an outsider? The Voyager, space just shooting out the time capsule into space situation. You know what I'm talking about?
No, I do not. You just mean the Voyager
the Carl
spacecraft
Sagan, yes,
going really far away.
Yeah, that's just Voyager just is moving further and further away from Earth, and they put on the spaceship these various things that they try to communicate what humanity was to some alien that might
plate?
Pick up the space trash.
Yeah.
They
have this engraved plate.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. And just thinking about what you would put on something like that, right? Or how do you communicate your existence to an alien. I mean, in that case, that's what it is, right? But if you think about it from a time perspective, you could also think about it as like a human thousands of years in the future. This is something I like to think about.
Yeah.
This is something I like to think about. Back it up. This is something...
Just rip a massive bowl and think about deep time.
Like, literally, yeah. This is something that I find really compelling about Bitcoin. Like, that's something that, you know...
All right, yeah. Reel it back into Bitcoin.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think... It's whenever people ask why I'm into Bitcoin, I usually just tell them like astrology got me into Bitcoin, which is true, right? That is like the way of saying it. And obviously, astrology is tied up in all of this as well. But like, what I mean by astrology got me into Bitcoin is that like, I'm looking at Bitcoin as like a spiritual, archaeological, civilizational project.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And astrology just gives you kind of the directions to look for those types of things. You know, like astrology essentially gives you a way of making sense of cycles. So, you know, they're planetary cycles, and you think, oh, okay, whenever this particular planetary cycle happens, that means this energy is available or this thing is happening. And so you look for it's a pattern recognition tool to like make you be like, oh, I'm looking for this now, and so now I see it. It must be true.
People certainly do recognize patterns.
Yeah. It's a psychological like trick, right? So it's true that like astrology led me to Bitcoin, but I think really like it was the like Age of Aquarius of it all that I was interested in, which many people are familiar with. The Age of Aquarius is just like a pop astrology thing.
We have different ages. We go through them very slowly.
Yes.
Astrologers fight over which age we're in and when precisely we're entering them.
Yeah. But it's, you know, to put it in like the question of thinking about and conceptualizing and communicating time,
Mm-hmm.
like planetary cycles are one way of communicating time. Like the cycle that you're talking about, the precession of the equinoxes, what determines what astrological age we're in, Age of Aquarius, Age of Pisces, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
that's a 25,920 year cycle. So it takes 25,000, almost 26,000 years for the equinoxes to go the whole way around the zodiac. And so we spend about 2,000 years in each astrological age. That's a long time in terms of like thinking about it. Like let's say you're using that as a way of trying to understand human civilization. Like that's like entire eras of human civilization in that astrological cycle. And we're like at the dawning of the next one.
Right.
Like it's
the dawning
a big
of the
deal.
Age of Aquarius.
It's a big deal.
So people tell me.
So people tell us. So many have said in this undisclosed
People
location
are
in Northern
saying.
California. I'm sure we're not the first to talk about the Age of Aquarius on this hill. You know, it's a common topic out here. But anyway, so I'm like one of the fucking three wise men looking for the birth of Jesus by following a star, right? Like I'm like, I know the Age of Aquarius is upon us. Like, what are the things that come up that seem related to these topics? Pattern recognition, like activated. And kind of through like whatever, an important astrological event, I like got tipped off to Bitcoin as maybe being something I should look into. And upon looking into it, I was just very like, wow, this is a very Age of Aquarius technology. Aquarius is all about decentralization. I think decentralization is a interesting word that a lot of people attach themselves to, but can mean different things in different contexts. But that idea of being an individual in a collection of other individuals, not being, you know, someone that just like melts yourself into the soup and kind of becomes a part of the undifferentiated mass, but like, what does it mean to be a star in the sky, right? Like an individual. You picking up what I'm putting down?
I guess, you know.
That's the energy of Aquarius. That's my point. That's like the vibe of Aquarius. So you look for those things in like an Age of Aquarius, new age evolution. And Bitcoin is like that, right? Bitcoin is a network of nodes that are all independently running, and they all have their own independent motivations.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying, bro.
Yeah.
It's not.
Let's bring it back to time here.
Okay.
I mean, like, Bitcoin is interesting in this, like, time conversation because of the fact that it's the first, like, costly record of time that we've produced.
Oh, so you want to go there? Okay, we can go there.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we have all these measurements of time, right? But
right.
all of them are, like, cheap. They're just, like, somebody in some French, you know, international organization, de Tempest Automatiques or whatever, putting up some number, right?
Right. How can you trust that? It's decentralized time, right? To make that point of like the way in which Bitcoin is decentralized is just that everyone agrees on their own together that something is true. This block was mined. This miner found this block, and I agree that they found it at this time, and then we move on to the next block, and then this person found this block at this time, and like so on and so forth. That's the way that Bitcoin works.
And each block is very expensive to produce, and thus, because they include a timestamp and there are certain rules around the timestamp that it has to be not too far away from your node's local time, and it has to go forward for some sort of weak version of forward. People don't really know this, but a lot of people don't know this, but Bitcoin timestamps, they aren't monotonically increasing. It isn't the case that each timestamp in each block is strictly greater than the last one. They actually, each block, the timestamp in each block, it has to be greater than the median, the average time of the last 10 blocks. So this
so it does. There can be exceptions as long as the average is following the rule.
So this sort of allows individual blocks to be like slightly forward, slightly back, or slightly back really. But in this median time pass of these like 10 blocks, that does march forward.
So Bitcoin time is weird in its own ways.
No, not well. Yes, it is weird. But if you want to look at a monotonically increasing timestamp, you just look at the average of 10 blocks.
I mean, Bitcoin. The same thing that makes Bitcoin good decentralized money is also what makes it a good decentralized timekeeping device. In the sense that we're all agreeing that this block happened at this time and it contained these transactions. It's the same sort of like network that's confirming both of those things. But that being said, I wouldn't replace my like clock that I look for normal everyday activities with the Bitcoin timestamp.
No, it'd be quite weird.
It'd be very weird. I mean, I feel like there are people that try to live by block height and block time, and like, I mean, good luck, bro. Like, that's a fun experiment, maybe. Like,
I would love it if people lived by block time. Like, if they're like, oh, I'm going to show up at the 100th block of this day, and it's slow, so they're just 45 minutes late.
But like, if you have no other concept of time, then maybe you don't even realize. You're like, oh, well, it's this block height. That's all you're tapped into. I don't think so. I don't think that it's the ideal way to keep time on that level. But think about it from a little bit zoomed out, right? Like, if you're just trying to understand this civilization. Let's say, okay, zoom out. Let's say that you're an alien that's coming to Earth like 1,000 years after our current civilization has like collapsed in some
more
way.
I think it's got to be more than 1,000 years.
Why do you say more than 1,000?
Well, because like, what you're getting at is that like, okay, the alien comes to Earth sometime after Earth's civilization has elapsed, and there are all these remnants and records of the times that things happened
the ruins,
on Earth, in the ruins. And I think if it was only 1,000 years, then you would pretty easily be able to make sense of, these records. There would be like astronomical observations, and you would easily be able to figure out, okay, this happened,
sure, okay,
1,200 years ago. So but we're talking about millions of years, right? Millions of years. When this gets tricky.
Let's say that, there's rubble. Like, it's just rubble. There's no real remnants of the civilization. Although I think like the idea of like the level of removal that we have from the civilization that built the pyramids, I think is a good level that I'm talking about. Like, you get bits and pieces, right? Like, but you can't reconstruct their society with perfect documentation. It's sure, like you get little archaeological sites that you get to like get clues from, essentially.
But, time-wise, isn't still a few millennia enough to reconstruct, when things happened? Like, if there's some, astronomical observation.
There's a lot of controversy over when certain things happened in terms of like, a primary source document, or like when the Sphinx was built is a point of controversy. A lot of times a megastructure like that is also altered over time, right? So when it was originally built versus when it was altered, or they built more onto it, or they tore this part down, that's a very difficult thing to figure out just based on the state that it's in right now.
Sure, yeah.
You can date rocks, but that also doesn't really like tell you anything, because that rock is probably old as fuck and not really, it's actually kind of tricky. But let's think about like, let's take that analogy, right, of like being an archaeologist or an alien or whatever, trying to make sense of like the ruins of a lost civilization the way that we would make sense of the civilization that built the pyramids. I'm I think that the civilization that's currently unfolding in the Age of Aquarius is a digital civilization. That doesn't mean I'm like a singularity. We're all going to be downloaded to the cloud and not have physical existences.
We're going to be uploaded to the cloud.
Right. Sorry. Uploaded to the cloud. Ascending to heaven in the cloud. But I think that if you look at what our civilization is spending its energy, time, resources, and attention on, it's digital. And I think Bitcoin is a perfect example of that. It is literally like we are expending so much energy for this digital structure that we're building. And it literally is like a mega structure that we're building. You know, the Bitcoin blockchain just gets ever longer and bigger.
That's what she said.
Especially as these people are just inscribing absolute nonsense, spamming the chain.
It's really interesting. I mean, it is this like digital construct that is so much more expensive than every other digital construct. Like if you look at the cost and energy that went into producing it, I wonder if there's anything else which is so expensive. I mean, I guess if you took, you know, all of the good research papers and you got like 500 gigabytes of them, then yes, those did cost more to produce than Bitcoin itself.
But they're not a single document, right? Like Bitcoin it's like what you're describing would be an amalgamation of many things that were created. That's not the same as so much energy, money, effort, however you want to phrase it, put into a single megastructure. Bitcoin there are pyramids.
That's true. Yeah, it is true. It is true. Yeah.
That's what I mean when I'm talking nonstop. Bitcoin is the digital megalith. That's what I'm talking about. Bitcoin is this digital megastructure that we have expended so much energy to create and are currently doing that. And if you were looking back on our civilization as an outsider, you would be like, why did they spend so much energy like building this structure? What was it for? How did they move those blocks? You know, like it's a great mystery, but it's also, if you think about it from an archaeological, like primary source document perspective, it's a very comprehensive log that does describe a very interesting facet of our society, like at least the like kind of macroeconomic aspect.
Certainly.
And, you know, let's say Bitcoin continues to become more adopted over time, right? Like that we're still so early or whatever. You know, Bitcoin could be essentially the primary source document to understand like our global economy, you know?
Yeah.
Right? It would be a really useful document to uncover as an archaeologist trying to understand the digital society.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's also one of the most large scale, like that level of archive, right? Like that complexity of archive. What other archive like that is downloaded in its entirety in so many different locations around the world, right? Like it's not just that Bitcoin, the digital megalith, that like file structure, it's not just that it lives on one computer somewhere hosted on a server in like Fremont, California, right? It exists on every node that runs Bitcoin. And the nodes are in a decentralized network all around the world. And so it also increases the likelihood that someone who is trying to make sense of our civilization thousands of years in the future would come across it, right? More likely than like really basically just like computer operating system documents are like more ubiquitous, right? There's probably other things that are more ubiquitous, but it has the benefit of being both extremely extensive as a document and also being extremely ubiquitously distributed around the planet. So I think it's kind of, in terms of a time capsule to send messages to the beyond or to communicate with civilizations that exist in the future or, you know, outside of our civilization, it's kind of the perfect device to send that time capsule message through.
Yeah.
Right? So those are the things that I think about when I be inscribing at the computer. Those are the things that I'm thinking about all the time. And yeah, that's been kind of, I mean, you can watch the first Aquarian conspiracy episode that we did. We talked about this topic a lot as well. So there's plenty more in that episode, kind of just like galaxy braining about Bitcoin as the digital megalith. But I want to talk about like what I'm trying to do now, right? Like that's the motivation. I'm like, okay, we have this opportunity right now to literally leave our mark on like the mega structure of our new Age of Aquarius civilization, right? Like if you had the opportunity to like scrawl something into the pyramids of Giza, like would you do that? Or maybe you wouldn't, you know, maybe
No,
the
I think
conclusion is
I'd make it like nice and tasteful, you know, not necessarily on the outside, but inside on like a little, you know, a little bit, leave my mark.
yeah,
you know?
or like what would you want to communicate, you know? Like it's like what would you want the opportunity to say if you think about, because like it's also, if you think about like Bitcoin as being the digital megalith of our civilization, it's being decentralized, like it's a decentralized building process, you know what I mean? As compared to something like the pyramids where it's like, okay, this is the design, this is what we're going with, you guys can haul those blocks, whatever. We're all collectively participating in the building of this megastructure. So it can be whatever we want it to be, right? And so like, you know, the pepes that you draw, like, and that you throw onto the Bitcoin time chain, you know, time after time after time, like it's, you know, that's an incredibly ubiquitous image on Bitcoin. Like that's something that would stick out, you know, that's a message that we're sort of like collectively sending through like the hive mind of the internet, you know, it's like Pepe is like a mind virus that we're all infected with. And that's why it's on the fucking digital megalith, you know? So I'm thinking about the things that I inscribe through that perspective. And I guess I've kind of been on my Bitcoin digital megalith ship for like a year now. And kind of just like that idea coming together with Bitcoin as a decentralized clock, which we talked about at the beginning of this episode, just the idea that, you know, Bitcoin is also this really great way of all deciding what time it is. Combining those two ideas, I kind of realized like, okay, you know, if you were trying to place Bitcoin as an archaeological primary source document, if you were trying to place Bitcoin in the time in which it existed, how could you tell that, you know, Bitcoin started in January 2009, like at that exact time, when January means nothing to you, 2009 means nothing to you? Like
January
that's not...
does mean something to you.
Who?
Because of the progression of the seasons, because it's tied to the...
January doesn't mean anything, though. The word January.
Oh, sure. Yeah, okay.
Right?
Yeah,
like, that's what you get. And you actually don't even get January 9th, or like 2009. You get a Unix timestamp, right? That's relative to someday, January 1st, 1970. Is that right?
Yeah.
So the Bitcoin timestamp is not like it's not like February 29th, 2012. Isn't it just a string of numbers?
Yeah, it's just a bunch of bits.
It's just a bunch of bits.
Number of seconds after January 1st, 1970.
Right. And that's just like a common thing with computer programming, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you just have a timestamp.
Well, everything is numbers in computers. You just figure out how to represent everything with a number.
Yeah. So imagine being an archaeologist looking at the timestamp and being like, what the fuck is that? Like you have no way of figuring that out.
Well, you see it go up every block.
Yeah.
You know,
but you can't place it.
Yeah, you can't place it.
You can see the way that it progressed relative to itself, but you can't place it. And so the desire becomes that, okay, if we're sending all these messages out to, you know, the thousands of years in the future, aliens or future humans or whatever, that we want to give them messages, we should probably also communicate the time in which we exist if it's clearly not obvious, like from the structure of Bitcoin itself. So how can we communicate this decentralized clock megastructure of transactions and inscriptions and whatever else we end up throwing on it throughout its construction? How do we communicate the time in which it existed, orienting it in space and time, essentially? Well, the way that it's been done on megastructures of the past is by orienting it along an astronomical axis. This makes sense, right? Like if you think about the motion of the planetary objects, that is a way of determining time over long periods of time that kind of anyone can do that's on Earth. Like right now, the sun is, you know, directly above us. Actually, it's a little bit offset directly above us. It's like 4 p.m. right now. You can see that. I can see that. If we kind of understand the dynamics of how these planetary objects work, we can take planetary information and we can distill it into the time in which something happened.
Like, for example, positioning the pyramid so that the front door is in line with the, you know, solar equinox, the summer equinox.
The equinox.
And then
literally the precession of the
changes
equinoxes
over time. And so then you know at least where in that cycle this thing was.
Exactly. Like that. you know, it's kind of impossible to say, like, you know, when they built their structures along those axes, were they doing it to communicate with us, or were they doing it just because that was obvious, or were they doing it, like, why did they do that? But it's kind of a natural thing to do, right? And it's what civilizations in the past have done. It makes sense to me to try to orient Bitcoin along planetary axis in the same way in order to communicate time, because you can, so like specifically think about it from the perspective of, let's say that you have a snapshot of the position of the planets at a given time. Mm-hmm. You can, if you know something about the way that those planetary objects work, which you can over observing them over time, basically just seeing like, okay, the moon takes 28 and a half days to complete its cycle. The sun takes 365.25 days to complete its cycle. If you know those kind of basic rules about the planetary objects, you can take a snapshot of the planetary positions and figure out when it happened. Yep. Because you have all these different overlapping cycles that, you know, at a time when you get the sun in one position, like that is going to happen once a year, right? Like the sun is going to be in the same position once a year, but the moon won't be in the same position every year, and Mars won't be in the same position every year. Venus won't be in all these planets. The likelihood of having a perfect astronomical repeat of a moment is extremely low. I don't know what it is, but it's extremely low. So you can literally take a single snapshot and you can figure out when something happened on like a solar system kind of scale. That's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to put that on Bitcoin. Like, I think that's like the way to communicate time to these future archaeologists or whatever. Like, take planetary data and put it onto Bitcoin. And that kind of like, that idea came together for me maybe in like December of this last year. Mm-hmm. Like, I feel like the pieces were all kind of floating around, and there were lots of people that had pieces of the puzzle that, like, you know, I would talk to someone and they would kind of give me an idea, and like I'd be like, oh, that's really interesting, and like, you know, like maybe all of the pieces of that were floating around in different people or in my orbit for a while, but it wasn't until like December that it actually kind of like clicked for me that like, oh, we need to actually be treating this like an archaeological project. Like, we need to be putting timestamps of planetary data on the digital megalith. That's an important community, like, civilizational project that should happen. And so I had that idea kind of like mulling around, and then I went home over the holidays and I hung out with my friend Michael, who's like a generative artist, like digital code art guy who I've been trying to do something on ordinals for a long time. And I told him about this, and we just sort of galaxy brained. That's what's honestly, sidebar, one of the best things about this podcast and just kind of like being openly like a weird spirituality person on the internet is that I get to connect like and galaxy brain with people so much more than I think I would have if I didn't have that extremely public image as being like a weird, I mean, that's spirituality person.
That's the great thing about the internet is like if it was pre-internet, you'd be a Bitcoin astrologer, you'd be very lonely, you know. And then the internet, you're like, oh shit, there's like 8 Bitcoin astrologies that live within a 10-mile radius, you know?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like people just get that context about me right off the bat. So it's like I don't have to like they just know that about me upon like meeting me sometimes, right? And so then they like come, like I just get to have really interesting conversations with people about these kind of ideas, which is incredible. It's so awesome. But Michael, basically, I saw him over the holidays and we were talking about this, just really brain blasting about the idea. And he kind of started getting like an idea for like an art piece. Cause the thing at that time, what I was trying to figure out is I was like, I know that we should be inscribing planetary data onto Bitcoin in order to timestamp it. And what I mean by that, actually, I'll be specific, is I basically want to inscribe planetary data from the time that a sat was mined, according to ordinal theory, and essentially tie that sat's birth to the position of the planets at that time. And just kind of do that regularly, right? Like we have sats since January 2009. Mm-hmm. So from January 2009 till now into the future, like we should just be regularly kind of creating these like tethers, right?
We only have 140 years to do it. Once the last sat is mined.
Exactly. Like we need to anchor it now, you know? So that's specific. So I knew I wanted to do something like that. I was like, I know this needs to be done. Like this is an important like civilizational project, but I'm not an artist. So I didn't really know. I was like, do you just should we just literally inscribe, the map of the planets on that sat? Or is there a way we can like use the data from the planetary objects to kind of make something interesting?
Mm-hmm.
I also think, I was trying to find, like, ideally what I wanted was for this project to be something that was using code to make the art, because I also think that that's kind of just from what I've observed, I think that that's sort of the art that fits the medium that is inscriptions.
Mm-hmm.
I think like it is extremely expensive to make your mark on the digital megalith. And I think like having an artistic representation that shows the smart way of doing that, thinking about it from that perspective, like that felt appropriate to me. So I was kind of like, okay, we should do something where we take something about the ephemeris data and then like the art is actually kind of based on that in some way. I was talking to my friend Michael about it. We were kind of brain blasting about it. And he came up with this idea of like, connect to the feeling of being like a weirdo Age of Aquarius like UFO hunter from like the 70s or 80s. Like connect to that like idea of like seeking for aliens, seeking for the truth, like trying to, we're being like crackpots with this idea also. Like I recognize that,
mm-hmm.
and I warmly embrace that, like
it's very important.
Yeah, like I'm proud to be like an insane person on the internet, like I'm very proud of that lineage of crazy people that are seeking truth. And so it was kind of like, okay, connect to that sort of like 80s UFO hunter kind of like X-Files sort of idea of aliens or seeking the truth, and create like a like literally what he made is like this little device called an Ephemera Kit that displays the planetary data on it, and you can interact with it and like move it around like it's like a device that's showing data. Like as if you were in your like weird ass garage in Arizona next to like an Air Force base, and you're like trying to tune in your ham radio to the frequencies that like the military is using,
mm-hmm.
so you can figure out if they found aliens. It's like that's the feeling that we wanted to recreate. And so he just like came out. I mean, he's like he does like whatever the 3D render kind of like, I literally like don't know how any of this works, but the like code art where it's like you render animations.
Yeah, the code art where you render animations.
The code art where you render animations.
You just mean 3D animations. You just mean 3D animations.
Yeah. But it's just like, it's so easy to do on ordinals because people have inscribed all of these libraries that like help you do it, right?
Right, yeah. He's probably using 3.js, which is a JavaScript 3D renderer.
Yeah, there's Draco, I think, is another one. I don't know what Draco is, but that was another one that was inscribed that I've heard people talk about. I would like to have Michael on the pod to talk about this topic, to be honest, because I think it's, obviously I don't know anything about it, and I think it's useful for people to know about if they're trying to make this kind of inscription art. Like, I think this is the ideal inscription art in a way.
Yep. Using these like previously inscribed public goods.
Yes.
On the
public
time
ordinal
chain.
goods.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Like using it's literally like a community resource, It's like, so I mean, the files themselves, like the actual inscriptions that Michael came up with, just kind of like playing around with that concept. I mean, I'm sure I'll like link the art below so people can actually look at it. But playing with that like idea, the device, it shows the planetary positions on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
So it has the planetary data. And then there's like a sundial on the side that shows the position of the moon in its like nodal cycle, which is like an 18.5-year cycle. It's just like significant. I won't get into it, but it's significant, as well as the moon phase.
What is the nodal cycle? I don't know what it is.
So basically the nodes of the moon's axis of like orbit around Earth also precess in a similar...
The nodes?
Yes. So the nodes are... Okay, so It's a similar idea.
Do you mean like when it's closest to the Earth and when it's furthest from the Earth?
Yes.
Okay.
So the same
Perihelion and aphelion?
kind of, but it's really more about the intersection of its rotation with its orbit. So the precession of the equinoxes. What is the precession of the equinoxes? It's a point in Earth's orbit around the sun that changes over time, but it's not like it's not a physical object, right? Like the equinox, when the equinox happens and the moment of equinox is like a calculated point based on the relationship between these orbits. And just the fact that Earth is like on a tilt and like that the orbit's not perfectly circular. It's like those kind of things. The nodes of the moon operate in a similar way. So it's like instead of it being the precession of the equinoxes with the Earth around the sun, it's the nodes of the moon and it's the moon around the Earth. It's just another interesting relevant cycle that is fun. So it shows that, and it just looks cool. To be honest, that's like, I think the big reason why we chose that. It just looks good.
That's the most important.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I like it. Like, I think like the nodes of the moon are very astrologically relevant, so I'm happy with it. But yeah, it shows that, and then it shows the moon phase. So you kind of get like some essentially like detailed moon data in addition to seeing the planetary ephemeris data. And of course, all of the planetary ephemeris data is inscribed as a part of the inscription, right? So the inscription, and then the color of the kit, the orb, all of like the various attributes we use attributes from the ephemeris data in order to determine those. And of course, I put some astrological stuff in there as well. So, you know, there's the sign that the planet is in is also very important to put as a record of archaeological importance. But I mean, essentially, like what ends up happening is these inscriptions, the actual like inscribed piece that is a piece of art that's rendered based on the planetary ephemeris data from the sat that it's inscribed on. That's only like 16 kilobytes, that file. It's very small. And it mostly just contains the ephemeris data. So as far as that being like a primary source document, like piece, like you don't even really, you know, it's like you just need that data, right? So we're just basically just inscribing that data and then rendering it in a fun way.
Yep.
So that's, yeah, so we were like, okay, that's great. Then I was like, okay, well, how do we decide what dates are important to memorialize in that way, right? So we have sats starting January 2009. How do you decide?
Where did you acquire these sats?
DZ, the DZ guys.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
What did you tell DZ in terms of DZ, Danny DZ, major sat hunter, sat panner operation? Shout out DZ and Vibes God.
Yeah, always.
What did you tell them? Like, what were you like? What did you say? Like, I want X. Like, did you want an even distribution? Did you want like particular dates?
I basically asked. Well, so we started by. We actually needed to get sats from particular dates for another project, the Fragmented Frames project that we helped these photographers do, Alex and Nevin. We inscribed the pictures on sats from the date that the pictures were taken. So, and there are 111 of them. And so I had already talked to DZ about getting sats from particular dates. And then I was basically like, well, how hard would it be to get sats from any date? You know, like for those, right, I gave him a list of 111 dates and it took maybe like a couple days to get all of the dates. There was maybe like one that was hard to get or something. I don't remember exactly. But basically I just sent him a list of dates, right? And then I don't know what sat panning magic they do to find these dates.
Sat panning make a
operation,
computer.
Yeah, but they found them, and so then I asked like basically like, well, how hard would it be to get a sat from any date? And they were like, I don't think it's that hard. And so then I think they tried to do it. I don't know if they have a sat from every date now, but basically the conclusion we came to was like, it's doable.
Really?
It's
on
hard.
Demand or get a sat from every date ahead of time? Obviously on demand, that you can ask them for a date and they'll get it.
Yes. I think what becomes tricky is looking for a particular block. So a date, like that's an entire day of blocks. That's 144 blocks. So those blocks are probably, unless it's like really early day of Bitcoin kind of blocks where it's like only a couple people mining. For the most part, if it's an entire day, it's so many different miners that Bitcoin is like, there's
well
sats,
dispersed.
dispersed all over the place.
Is it significantly harder to find dates from blocks that have a smaller reward?
Must be, right? You would think.
Yeah, you would think.
Like, so actually that probably helps what I'm talking about, right? Where it's like, now that there's such a distributed network of miners, then it's like, yeah, okay, someone mines a block and that Bitcoin goes out to all these different like entities all over the place, and there's all these different miners that are doing that, whereas maybe like in like the Hal Finney days that wasn't as common, but there also are more sats from that time.
Yep.
So in any case, it's possible basically to get sats from a certain date. So yeah, that was also a piece of the puzzle, was kind of like figuring out, okay, well, how do we actually get the sats that we're going to inscribe on? But then it's, how do you choose, right? Like, how do you say, okay, we're going to inscribe this on 1 sat per month, like starting in January 2009? Like, that's kind of boring. I mean, it's a good archaeological record, but it's a bit like arbitrary. There's no meaning to that, really. It's just like utilitarian. And I liked the idea of people deciding, like, you know, let's say that you think that there's an important date, like societally or maybe personally. I mean, Bitcoin dates are obvious, right? Like, that's, everyone goes for that. But like, what's a day since January 2009 that you would want to have like memorialized for archaeologists thousands of years in the future, right?
God.
Maybe it's like the day your kid was born, or you got married, or you graduated, right? Like just, it could be personal, right? Or
I
it
thought
could
you were
be,
asking me, and I was like, God, really nothing significant has happened in my life since January 9th.
I mean, my answers would all be astrological dates, obviously, you know. What about January 6th, 2021?
What happened January 6th, 2021? Ordinals launched?
Yeah, Ordinals launched.
I guess, you know, but that already left its mark on the time chain. My paw prints are all over the digital megalith.
That's so true when you think about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't, I mean, you're one of the first like humans inscribed. Inscription 30 is you as Trump.
Yeah.
So
I mean, more significant to me is that that the protocol that, you know, I helped design is on there.
yeah, you did your part. You did your part for building the digital megalith. But in any case, whatever, there's dates that might be, I mean, you don't even have to think about it from a personal perspective, right? You can think about it from an archaeological perspective and say, this date was important, and I want it memorialized, and I want it to be like well tethered to the decentralized astronomical time chain. So basically what we're going to do with these inscriptions is we're going to just have an auction where people bid on dates, right? So like, rather than us saying, okay, we're going to inscribe on a bunch of dates, like we're going to pick them this way, or we're going to pick them in some meaningful way, I would just rather people choose on their own and kind of like let the market decide, right? So if you are interested in collecting a piece or participating in this project, essentially, this archaeological project, then you bid on a date. We're doing it every difficulty adjustment because it seemed like choose a Bitcoin time cycle, right? Like, I'm not going to choose some Gregorian calendar ass time cycle. We didn't even get into the goddamn Gregorian calendar, but it's kind of not important at this point. I'm not going to choose something based on like time that's not relevant to Bitcoin or to planetary time, right? And the difficulty adjustment is kind of nice. It's like every 2 weeks, you know? And it's determined on block height, so it also makes building auction tech easier.
Yeah, I think that doing something every 2 weeks is a great cadence for projects.
Yeah.
You know, they want to do something periodically. 2 weeks is kind of a nice number, and the block adjustment is this kind of thing everybody can agree upon and know when it is.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, so there's, it's a nice cadence. It's also like, yeah, if you're doing an actual ascending auction with PSBTs, it's easier if you have
Descending, right?
Nope, ascending.
Oh.
So basically the way we're going to do it is just that, you know, after that block, the difficulty adjustment block, like we reset and like you collect up a new round of PSBT bids.
Oh, and you just accept the highest bidder.
Yeah, we're going to accept the top 16 bids, I think.
Okay.
The reason 16 is because I'm thinking if the difficulty adjustment happens approximately every 2 weeks, I'd like to do more than 14 at a time so that we eventually could get to the point that we inscribe every date, right?
Yep.
Like, we're not in this like constant catch up. It's like a slow catch up. So 16, right?
Yep.
Slightly more than once a day. And so you're kind of like filling in the gaps as you go. And basically what you would do is like to participate in the auction, you select your date, right? You say, I want to inscribe this date for whatever reason.
Yep.
You put in your bid, you submit your bid, top 16 dates are what's are selected. So let's say that you're bidding on a certain date and someone else also wants that date. You're not both going to get that date. Only one person gets that date. So I think that makes sense. Like if from the archaeological perspective, right? It's like, why would you inscribe that date 2 times, especially in one auction? Like you want it to just be like that tether is what exists and like you get to have it. It's also kind of interesting from a collection perspective, right? Because as far as I know, the way most collections work is it's like you do a mint and it's like all the pieces are released at once. Whereas this, it's like, it's not a finite supply, although it actually is. I think, if you do it every difficulty adjustment, 16 pieces, every difficulty adjustment, you run out of dates after 8,100 and something dates. So essentially like the collection's not going to be bigger than that.
Yep.
Just like, cause that's the supply schedule.
Yep.
So the collection, but that's a long ass time from now. I think it's like 25 years from now or something. You hit that number.
Yep.
So in 25 years, you hit that 8,000 total supply cap. But it's essentially just like a small, like every 2 weeks you get a new cycle of the supply to the collection.
Yep.
Which I think is kind of interesting. I mean, I'm not really like a auction, like degen kind of person, but I think it's interesting. Like I look at this and I'm like, I wonder like what people that are into that will do with that model, you know? But in any case, really all I care about is that someone bids enough that the piece can be inscribed, and then that's a part of the digital megalith. Like, and it's a small file. It's not super expensive to inscribe. So as long as someone's...
Is the content just the metadata about the planet, the planetary positions, or is it also this 3D like image?
It's the 3D, yeah.
And what is it a 3D image of?
It's the Ephemera Kit, like the UFO hunter device that has like the planetary data on it. And you can interact with it. So there's like a little trackball that you can interact with and move the data around. You can zoom. It makes sound. Like you can turn it on and off and it makes sound.
Sick.
It's like really, it's so deranged. Like that's the,
Nice.
it's like, I think we should just have Michael on the podcast to talk about it at some point, because I think it would be technically interesting. And the art is just like a total rabbit hole crazy fest. But, yeah, it's like a really like funny, interesting art project in addition to being this like bizarre spiritual archaeological digital megalith project.
Sick.
And yeah, I think we're going to launch it in the next like 2 weeks. Like, I mean, basically every difficulty adjustment is like the new deadline, right?
What's been the hardest thing about doing the project?
Oh my God, these devs. My devs.
It's always somebody who has no idea how development works complaining about devs. Oftentimes rightly.
They're just bad at estimating their own time. That's the hard part. And I can't estimate their time either.
Yep.
You know?
I mean, this is just a classic
It's
problem in computer science.
Yeah,
Didn't I give you that book? Did you read The Mythical Man Month?
You think I read the entirety of the Mythical Man Month?
Did you read at least part of The Mythical Man
I
Month?
skimmed the Mythical Man Month. I mean, I
Okay.
probably should go through it.
Yeah, you should.
Maybe I'll bring it. Maybe I'll travel with it and do some self-education.
It's classic that programmers don't know how long anything they're going to do is going to take.
Yeah, it's just I don't blame my devs. I love my devs. My devs are my pride and joy. They're my little boys. I love my devs dearly, but yeah, you never know how long something's going to take. You might think something simple, and then there's
those unknown unknowns that really get you.
No, literally. I mean, even just like, the calculating of the planetary positions, like I want to double, triple check that, right? So like, you might pull. So the planetary data that we use, we're pulling from JPL, which is like it's kind of like the NASA ephemeris, like if you want ephemeris data for planetary objects from NASA, that's what you pull from, like the JPL Horizons API. That's what we pull from. But that data doesn't perfectly align with a lot of like astrological websites. So like
I wonder which one is correct.
Well, this is actually the thing I'm trying to dig in now and fully wrap my mind around, because it's not that they disagree on the position of the planets. It's that they disagree slightly on the degree of the zodiac that they're in, which does feel like an interesting, it's a hard, like deciding exactly where something is in the zodiac is not exactly trivial, because the planets don't follow that line perfectly. They're often slightly offset from that line because their orbits are not perfect, like perfectly in line, right?
Yep.
So the way that you calculate what degree point that ends up at, I literally think I'm going to have to go in and like do the calculation. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's just little things like that come up because it's like, we obviously need it to be perfect, like it's going to be inscribed on the digital megalith in a uncensorable, permissionless way for all of time. So I don't want to fuck up anything. So that's been the hardest part. The easiest part has been just the ideas coming together and the right people coming in at the right time to make them happen.
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, connecting with Michael was like such an important part of the project coming to life. And I think I've had such good conversations with people over the last year, really, that have just like there's a lot of pieces of the final like project that are from conversations that I had with people and just kind of collecting the ideas up. Because it's not an easy thing to wrap your mind around. Like, you kind of have to know, you have to like be thinking about deep time. So it's a little like philosophical. You have to like understand astronomy enough. You also have to be able to program it, like to code it. You have to understand Bitcoin. There's a lot of different pieces and different expertise that came together through conversations and connections that I had that like, it's the best.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I don't know. So I'm inscribing the digital megalith. That's what I'm going to communicate our place in space and time to the aliens thousands of years in the future who wish to understand our civilization. I'm making a humble attempt,
I like it.
Yeah. And it's probably going to launch in the next like 4 weeks. If I had to guess, I feel like it's not going to be this next difficulty adjustment, maybe the next one. And yeah, it'll just be an auction, 16 dates, every difficulty adjustment. You can participate in it or not. And if
Not financial advice?
I mean, it's not financial advice. I consider it a community archaeological project. I do. But yeah, if you win the auction, then, you get your date. We inscribe the piece on a sat from that date.
How do you
then we send it to you.
The PSBTs, what are they bidding on? Because what are they bidding on? Because there is not a.
It's not trustless. It's like they're sending us that.
You could. Oh yeah, interesting.
Because they're not. The piece isn't inscribed, right? The sat doesn't. It's not like they're doing a transaction where they're sending money in exchange for that sat with the inscription on it.
Yep.
It's like. They will send it, they win the auction, and then, I mean, I think basically the way we're going to do it is we have until the next difficulty adjustment to make the piece and send it to you.
You could make
Otherwise, your transaction, like...
You could make it a little bit trustless, a little bit more trustless. You could have 16 dust UTXOs, and when somebody places a bid, they take their input UTXOs and create a PSBT which spends their input UTXOs and this one dust UTXO, one of these 16 dust UTXOs. And so they actually, whenever they bid, they create 16 PSBTs, bidding the same amount with the same UTXOs, spending each one of these dust UTXOs, one for each of the 16 PSBTs.
Why is it 16?
Because you want to be able to accept 16 bids.
So it's for, yeah.
And this means that you can accept each bid once. Like, for each of the 16 UTXOs, you accept one of the highest bids. But you cannot accept more than 16 of these bids because each bid is only signed. There are 16 UTXOs, and each bid is these 16 PSBTs, which spend one of the UTXOs.
What does that solve?
What that solves is, like, presumably you could just take all of the PSBTs after the auction. Like, you just take everybody's money from the auction.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so that's one aspect, right? Is that, like, if you're only taking the top 16 bids, how do you know you're only taking the top 16 bids?
Right.
I was thinking more of, if you win the auction, how do you guarantee that piece is sent to you? Right. That aspect, I don't know that there's a way to do. That just is
no way to do it, simply because it doesn't. The piece doesn't exist yet.
Yeah, it is what it is. So it's not like entirely trustless, but that's pretty. We're pretty upfront about that.
Yep.
I don't know. Is there a way to do a time lock where it's like after like if something is not fulfilled by a difficulty adjustment, that the transaction like gets sent back?
The problem is that the concept of like fulfilled in this case is not something that you can like sign a PSPT for or subject to a time lock, right? You could create a time lock that, I guess, some oracle like says whether the thing has been delivered or not, but you couldn't, there's this thing that you want to get doesn't exist yet, right? It's the UTXO that holds it has not been created yet. And so because you don't know the hash of that UTXO, you can't sort of make any statements about it in Bitcoin script.
Sure. Can we do this with a soft fork? Can we soft fork Bitcoin?
Yeah, you could probably soft fork Bitcoin in highly undesirable ways, like you could make the SAT numbers, you could add a script opcode to get the SAT numbers in a script, like opsat, that pushes the SAT number onto the stack. And then you could do assertions that the SATs in the inputs are contained, that the script like can only be spent if certain SATs are in the input. But this would require every Bitcoin Core node to run a full ORed index, which would be horrifically slow. So we definitely don't want to do that. Like where you could say, okay, this can only be spent if I get this SAT in this transaction. I mean, it'd be like crazy heavy duty transaction introspection with like a full SAT index. So we don't want to burden Bitcoin Core in that way.
Okay, so maybe we won't do that one.
Yeah, this is the difference between me and everybody else who has preposterous ideas. Is I have preposterous ideas, and I don't want to make them part of Bitcoin Core. Everybody else wants their preposterous ideas in Bitcoin Core. I'm like, no, just let it be. The preposterous ideas can live on the L2 in the preposterous like protocol layer. They don't need to be part of Bitcoin Core.
So true, King. So true when you think about it. Yeah, I mean, I think in this specific instance, there's not a good way to do ascending auctions on Bitcoin for inscriptions.
Well, especially for inscriptions that don't exist.
Especially for inscriptions that don't exist. But I mean, one nice thing about the way that we're doing it is the fact that the auction ends at a certain block. So that's a big problem with like ascending auctions. Like for the most part, you want an auction that extends 5 minutes every time a new bid is placed at the end, right?
Sure, yeah.
You want like the opportunity for things to go into like a crazy bidding war and like whatever. In our case, we're resetting the clock like on that block. On that block, the first auction ends, the second auction begins, and that continues forever. So it makes it a lot easier to design like an ascending auction if you can just have it end at a block height.
Yep.
Which is nice. But yeah, I mean, right, you guys just basically have to trust me, bro, that we'll send you an Ephemera Kit. But yeah.
You better not fuck this up. Can you imagine the fucking collateral damage optics on me?
Oh, God.
If you fucking rug everybody?
If I rug everyone, the
rug.
digital megalith is over. We had our one opportunity to create the digital megalith, and this just soiled it. I fucked up the brand forever.
I mean, I'm more thinking about how I would have to like go into hiding or whatever.
You'd have to go into hiding. Yeah. I blame it on you.
She's definitely going to send you them, okay? Believe all women.
Yeah,
including Erin.
#believe all women, especially this one.
Yep.
Okay, should we end it there?
Yeah, let's end it.
All right, thanks for listening. If you have any questions, comments, or crazy ideas, I genuinely love to hear them.
Yeah.
I might regret saying that.
She loves getting deranged DMs.
I take calls.
Non-sexual DMs.
I take calls from
but
crazy
deranged
people.
DMs, she loves them.
I literally will like hop on a call with someone who's like sent me the most psychotic message you've ever seen. But then we have a great conversation. I'm like, you're really onto something, bro. So yeah, just if you have any thoughts on this or questions or whatever, let me know.
Yeah.
And the project should be launching soon. It's called Ephemera. But yeah, I'm just trying to leave my mark on the Age of Aquarius digital megalith.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Thanks for tuning in.
Bye, everybody.